Former British Columbia Attorney General Geoff Plant is involved with Stop the Violence, an organization with former premiers, former attorney generals, mayors, and MLAs, all advocating for an end to the criminalization of cannabis possession. He joins me from Vancouver. Mr. Plant, I'm wondering if you looked at what happened on election night in the United States when the two states voted to legalize pot and thought, all right, we're starting to get, our cause is getting some allies south of the border. Are you any more optimistic it's going to move that way, or do you still think we're going to face obstacles to getting cannabis legalized up here?
Well, I think there's still a long road to go here in Canada, but I do think what happened on Tuesday in Washington and Colorado is a great step forward. It's a great boost. If if they can do it south of the border, then surely we can do it in Canada. And for a long time, one of the arguments against doing anything to change the failed prohibition law here in Canada was that Canadians should be careful not to get too far ahead of the Americans on this issue. And now it looks as though, in fact, American voters are getting ahead of at least the government of Canada. And so I feel encouraged by what happened this week.
I looked at your annual report for Stop the Violence, and they had an interesting Angus Reid poll that showed, I think it was 75% of BC residents really feel that they'd be better off if you legalized it and taxed it, and they wouldn't feel uncomfortable if you did that. It sounds to me like public opinion's already there. I don't know quite what the holdup is in the political realm.
Well, that's a great observation and a great reality. So what I'm saying to folks who are in that 75% majority is we've kind of mainstreamed the conversation. You've identified the people who are part of this movement. What we have to do now is figure out how to mobilize our energy and cause federal politicians to pay attention. So at least to the people in DC who are, I think, maybe leading the country on this, write your member of parliament, make your member of parliament accountable for their failure to follow the wishes, increasingly the wishes of the majority of their community and constituents, and advocate for this change. And I mean, the Prime Minister is always very clear about this, but the Prime Minister is a very smart politician, and one day he'll wake up and realize that he's swimming against the tide of Canadians on this issue, and we'll see change. I believe it.
What do you think is going to be the consequence if Washington goes ahead and allows the sale of small amounts of marijuana in stores and taxes it? And I mean, you're a former attorney general. You understand living next door to a state, say, that has completely different laws than, say, British Columbia. Is that going to create a law enforcement problem, or more just a border problem?
Well, there will be some adjustments, and as Jim Hsu, the Vancouver Police Department chief, said a few minutes ago, I mean, the people in Washington have now got to figure out how to get alignment between the change in state law and the continuing federal government prohibition in the United States. I think they'll find that way forward. And so we'll have a situation here that actually in some respects is not that dissimilar from something that British Columbians are used to. When I was a kid growing up in Vancouver, you couldn't go to a bar in Vancouver on Sunday, but you could just south of the border. And it didn't seem to bring human civilization to an end to have that sort of disparity around these sorts of minor issues. So there will be an impact of some kind, but I don't think it's going to be quite as disruptive as people think. After all, there are maybe 400,000 or 500,000 British Columbians who now use marijuana, even though it is illegal. So the prohibition in Canada is not having a deterrent effect on consumption here in BC.
I just look at the quest for government revenue and think if these states start taxing this stuff and we see how much they bring in, that's going to be a pretty strong incentive for governments to say, we want the money.
Well, we have a multi-billion-dollar underground economy in support of the organized crime control over the cannabis market. And I mean, I think the next step is for the business community here to wake up and realize that you've got to normalize that part of our economic activity, because otherwise it's the lawful businesses that are paying more than their fair share of the tax revenue from economic activity in the province. And yeah, I do think that there are going to be people sitting around treasury boards across this country trying to figure out how to pay for the public services that we all want, and realizing there is a huge untapped source of revenue available if we can just make this policy change.
Okay, well, stay tuned. Geoff Plant, thanks very much for joining us.